Dusty roads stretched out like a scar across the Texas plains, under a sun so fierce it seemed angry at the earth. Heat waves shimmered off the asphalt, distorting the horizon where the blue sky met the scorched brown grass. On the shoulder of Highway 281, miles from the nearest gas station, a battered 1998 Ford pickup sat with its hood propped open like the jaws of a thirsty beast. Steam hissed from the radiator, vanishing instantly into the dry air. Leaning against the fender was Caleb Moore, a young man with calloused hands and the weight of the world pressing down on his denim-clad shoulders. He wiped sweat and grease from his forehead with a rag that was dirtier than his face. Beside him, inside the cab, his wife Sarah was fanning herself with a folded newspaper, trying to keep their 4-year-old daughter, Lily, cool in the suffocating heat. They were on their way to Houston, not for a vacation, but for a Hail Mary job interview Caleb had lined up at a refinery. It was their last shot before the bank took their small plot of land in Poteet. Caleb slammed the hood down in frustration, the metallic clang ringing out in the silence of the countryside. The truck was dead. The water pump had seized, and with it, their hope of making it to the city by 5 o'clock. He kicked the tire, a cloud of dust puffing up around his worn boots. He looked up at the sky, whispering a desperate prayer, asking for a miracle or at least a ride. Cars had been zooming past for an hour, in different blurs of chrome and glass, ignoring the family stranded in the furnace of the afternoon. Then a white, heavy-duty pickup truck appeared on the horizon. It wasn't speeding like the others. It moved with a steady, purposeful rhythm. As it approached, the driver slowed down, the gravel crunching under the massive tires as he pulled onto the shoulder behind Caleb's smoking vehicle. The engine of the white truck purred with the reliability of a well-oiled machine. The door opened, and a pair of pristine, exotic leather boots hit the dirt. The man who stepped out was dressed simply, but impeccably. Pressed Wrangler jeans, a crisp button-down shirt tucked in, and a white cowboy hat that looked like it had been shaped by the wind itself. He walked with a gait that was easy and unhurried. He didn't look like a stranger. He looked like a neighbor you had known all your life. Caleb squinted against the sun. The man's face was shadowed by the brim of his hat, but his smile was visible, calm and reassuring. "Need a hand there, son?" the man asked, his voice a rich baritone that sounded like oak and leather. Caleb nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. "The water pump gave out," Caleb explained, his voice cracking with stress. "I have got to get to Houston by 5. My whole life depends on it." The stranger didn't say a word. He just walked to the front of Caleb's truck, popped the hood again, and peered inside. He inspected the engine with eyes that had seen 1,000,000 miles of Texas roads. He turned back to his own truck, reached into the bed and pulled out a red toolbox that looked as well-traveled as he was. Without asking for anything, the man rolled up his sleeves and dove into the engine bay. Caleb tried to protest, saying he didn't have money to pay a mechanic, but the man just waved him off. For the next 40 minutes, they worked side by side in the blistering heat. The stranger moved with precision, replacing a hose clamp here, tightening a belt there, and using a jug of water from his own supply to refill the radiator. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. Grease smeared onto his forearms, but he didn't seem to care. When the job was done, the stranger wiped his hands on a rag and signaled for Caleb to start the engine. The old Ford coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life. Caleb felt tears sting his eyes. He stepped out and grabbed the stranger's hand, shaking it vigorously. "I do not know how to thank you, mister. I do not have much, but I can send you money when I get paid." The stranger chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to cool the air. "Keep your money, son. Just do a kindness for someone else down the line. That is how we pay debts in Texas." As the stranger turned to leave, the sunlight hit his face at just the right angle. Caleb froze. The blue eyes, the crooked smile, the aura of quiet legends, it hit him like a lightning bolt. "You are George Strait," Caleb whispered, disbelief coloring every syllable. The man just tipped his hat, climbed into his white truck and winked. "Good luck in Houston, Caleb. Drive safe." And just like that, the king of country was back on the road, leaving a cloud of dust and a family whose lives had just been saved by a ghost of the plains. Hours later, the atmosphere inside the NRG Stadium in Houston was a different kind of heat. It was the heat of anticipation, the electric hum of 60,000 souls gathering for a pilgrimage. The air smelled of popcorn, diesel fuel, sawdust from the rodeo floor, and expensive perfume mixed with honest sweat. It was the final night of the rodeo, and George Strait was the headliner. For the people of Texas, this wasn't just a concert, it was church. Deep in the bowels of the stadium, far from the cheering crowds, the air was cold and sterile. In the executive suite, the lighting was harsh and fluorescent. Julian Thorne stood by the window, looking down at the empty stage as the crew made final preparations. Thorne was a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a boardroom. His suit was Italian, slim fit, and cost more than Caleb Moore's truck. He checked his diamond-encrusted watch impatiently. He was the new vice president of operations for the conglomerate that had recently acquired the distribution rights for the tour. To Thorne, music wasn't art. It was data. It was algorithms, retention rates, and profit margins. The door to the suite opened, and George Strait walked in. He had cleaned up since the roadside encounter. His shirt was starched stiff, his black jacket was immaculate, and his black hat was set perfectly on his head. He carried his guitar case like a rifle. He looked at Thorne with a polite but guarded expression. "You wanted to see me, Julian," George said, his voice calm in the acoustic deadness of the room. Thorne turned, flashing a smile that didn't reach his shark-like eyes. "George," the legend, "thanks for coming. We need to discuss the strategy for the next leg of the tour." Thorne walked over to a glass table and slid a thick contract across it. "We have been running the numbers, George. Your ticket prices are too low. You are leaving millions on the table. We need to implement dynamic pricing, VIP packages, meet and greets for $5,000 a pop, and we need to update the set list. The data shows that the younger demographic responds better to shorter songs, more upbeat tempos. We need you to cut the ballads." George didn't look at the contract. He kept his eyes on Thorne. He walked over to a chair and sat down slowly, resting his hands on his knees. "Julian, I have been doing this for 40 years. I do not sing for the demographics. I sing for the people. I sing for the cowboy who saved up for 3 months to buy a nosebleed seat. I am not going to gouge them so you can buy another house in Malibu. And as for the songs, I play what is real. I play the truth." Thorne's smile vanished. He leaned over the table, his hands gripping the edge. "The world is changing, George. Authenticity is a marketing term now. If you do not adapt, you become a relic, a museum piece. We have the power to rebrand you or to bury you. This is not a request, it is a directive from the board. Sign the addendum, raise the prices, change the show, or we will make things very difficult for you." George stood up. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get angry. He just looked at Thorne with a pitying expression, the way a father looks at a child who has broken a window. "Son, you can own the trucks, the lights, and the speakers, but you do not own the music. And you sure as hell do not own me. I play for the fans. If that is a problem, you can tear up that contract right now." George turned his back on the executive and walked out of the room, the door clicking shut with a finality that echoed like a gunshot. Left alone, Thorne's face turned a deep shade of crimson. He wasn't used to being told no. He wasn't used to integrity. To him, George's refusal wasn't a moral stand. It was an act of war. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed a number. The voice on the other end was raspy and nervous. It was Eddie, a disgruntled sound engineer who had been passed over for a promotion and was deep in gambling debt. "Eddie," Thorne hissed into the phone, "are we set for tonight?" "Yeah, Mr. Thorne," Eddie replied, his voice trembling. "But are you sure about this? This is George Strait we are talking about. The crowd might riot." Thorne watched George's retreating figure on the security monitor. "Let them riot. I want him humiliated. I want the world to think he is just another greedy fraud. Do it during the most emotional part of the show. Break their hearts, Eddie, and then we will rebuild him in our image." Thorne hung up. He sat back in the leather chair, imagining the headlines the next morning. He would destroy the king of country to save the bottom line. He had a flash drive in his pocket, containing a heavily edited audio file from a private board meeting years ago. Out of context, it was damning. It was poison. And tonight he was going to inject it straight into the veins of 60,000 fans. Down in the dressing room, George sat alone. He picked up his acoustic guitar, the wood worn smooth by decades of playing. He strummed a G chord, the sound resonating against the cinder block walls. He felt a heaviness in his chest. It wasn't fear, it was sadness. He knew men like Thorne. He had seen them come and go in Nashville for years, suits who thought they could buy soul. But this felt different. This felt personal. George closed his eyes and thought about the family on the side of the road earlier that day. Caleb, Sarah, and little Lily. He had left them 2 tickets at the box office under Caleb's name, front row center. He wanted to remind himself why he did this. It wasn't for the charts, it was for them. The door opened and his tour manager, a gruff old woman named Martha, who had been with him since 1981, poked her head in. 5 minutes, boss. House is packed to the rafters. You ready? George stood up, adjusted his belt buckle and put his hat back on. I was born ready, Martha. Let's go to work. He walked down the long concrete tunnel toward the stage. The roar of the crowd grew louder with every step. It was a physical force, a vibration that rattled the teeth. As he reached the side of the stage, the house lights went down. The darkness was total, save for the thousands of cell phone lights twinkling like stars in a Texas night sky. The announcer's voice boomed over the PA system, shaking the floorboards. Ladies and gentlemen, live from Houston, the king of country, George Strait. The stage lights exploded in a blinding flash of white and blue. The band kicked into the opening riff of Deep in the Heart of Texas, and the stadium erupted. It was deafening. George walked to the center mic, waved to the crowd, and flashed that signature smile. For a moment, everything was perfect. The music was pure. The connection was instant. He looked down at the front row and saw Caleb and Sarah. They were screaming, crying, holding each other. Caleb was pointing at George, mouthing the words, "Thank you." George nodded at them, a secret acknowledgement between men of the road. For the first hour, the show was flawless. George played the hits. Check Yes or No, The Chair, Oceanfront Property. The audience sang every word, their voices blending into a massive choir that drowned out the instruments. Up in the sound booth, high above the arena, Eddie sat sweating in front of the massive mixing console. His hands were shaking. Next to him stood Julian Thorne, arms crossed, watching the stage like a vulture. "Not yet," Thorne whispered, his eyes cold. "Wait for the ballad. Wait until they are vulnerable." Eddie swallowed hard. He looked at the USB drive plugged into the master override slot. He felt sick. He had grown up listening to George, but the debt sharks were circling, and Thorne had promised to wipe the slate clean. On stage, the tempo slowed down. The lights turned a soft, golden hue. The band quieted down, leaving only the fiddle and the steel guitar weeping softly in the background. George stepped up to the microphone, holding his hat over his heart for a moment, before placing it back on his head. "This next song," he said, his voice intimate and low, "goes out to anyone who has ever had to work hard to keep a dream alive. To the cowboys, the farmers, the mechanics on the side of the road. This is Amarillo by Morning." The opening fiddle notes drifted through the stadium, haunting and beautiful. A hush fell over the crowd. Couples swayed in the aisles. It was the holy grail of country songs. George closed his eyes and began to sing Amarillo by Morning, Up from San Antonio. Thorne leaned forward in the booth. "Now," he commanded. Eddie hesitated. "Do it!" Thorne barked. Eddie's trembling finger hit the macro key programmed to cut the live feed and trigger the preloaded audio file. Suddenly, a high-pitched screech of feedback tore through the stadium speakers. It was agonizingly loud, like a jet engine screaming in a library. People covered their ears, wincing in pain. The music cut out instantly. The lights on the stage flickered violently and then died, plunging the arena into a confused, murmuring darkness. The emergency lights bathed the stage in a sickly red glow. George stood frozen at the microphone. He tapped it. Dead. He looked back at his band. They were just as confused. He looked up toward the sound booth, shielding his eyes against the glare of the spotlights that were now erratically searching the crowd. Then the voice boomed out. It was George's voice. There was no mistaking it, but the quality was different. Grainy, distorted, recorded in a small, echoey room. It sounded like a wiretap. It sounded forbidden. The voice echoed off the concrete walls of the stadium, loud and clear in the sudden silence. "I don't give a damn about what these people think," the crowd gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the building. The recording continued, the tone dismissive and arrogant. "I just want their money. That is all they are to me. Revenue." The silence that followed was heavier than the feedback. It was a dead, suffocating weight. 60,000 people stood paralyzed. The hero, the legend, the man who represented everything good and decent about Texas, had just been heard calling them nothing but revenue. George stood alone on the dark stage. He heard the words. He recognized the voice. He recognized the meeting where those words were spoken, but he also recognized the edit. He knew exactly what was happening. He felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He didn't move. He didn't run. He stood his ground, a solitary figure in the red light, facing a tidal wave of betrayal. In the front row, Caleb looked up at his hero, his eyes wide with confusion. He looked at the man who had fixed his truck for free, the man who had given him these tickets. It didn't make sense, but the voice was there. The evidence was ringing in their ears. Up in the booth, Thorne smiled. It was a cruel, victorious smile. He had done it. He had severed the bond. He watched the crowd waiting for the first boo, the first beer cup to be thrown. He was ready to watch the king fall, but the silence stretched on. It was the silence of a heart breaking. The audience wasn't angry yet. They were stunned. They were waiting for an explanation, waiting for it to be a joke. But the stage remained dark, and the audio clip looped again, louder this time. "I don't give a damn about what these people think. I just want their money." George took a step forward to the edge of the stage. He had no microphone. He had no way to defend himself against the lie that was echoing around him. He looked into the darkness, searching for the faces he knew were out there. He saw the doubt creeping in. He saw the pain. This was the moment Julian Thorne had engineered, the complete and total destruction of a legacy. The stadium, once a place of worship, was turning into a courtroom, and the verdict was being read over the loudspeakers. The silence that hung over NRG Stadium was not peaceful. It was a living, breathing monster. It was the kind of silence that precedes a tornado, heavy with pressure and the smell of ozone. 60,000 people, who just moments ago were a unified sea of adoration, were now a fractured landscape of confusion and heartbreak. The loop of the audio file had stopped, but the words were seared into the collective consciousness of the arena. "I just want their money." The sentence hung in the air like toxic smoke. On the stage, bathed in the harsh, unforgiving red of the emergency lights, George Strait remained motionless. He had removed his hat, holding it against his chest in a gesture that usually signaled reverence, but now looked like a shield protecting his heart. He could feel the eyes of the crowd on him. He could feel their judgment. It was a physical weight, pressing down on his shoulders, heavier than any guitar he had ever carried. He looked out into the void, trying to make eye contact with the front rows, trying to convey 40 years of honesty with just a look. But the distance was too great. The darkness was too deep. In the front row, Caleb Moore gripped the railing until his knuckles turned white. His wife Sarah was crying softly, holding their daughter close. The people around them were beginning to murmur. The shock was wearing off, replaced by the slow-burning ember of anger. A man 2 rows back, a burly rancher in a stained trucker hat, stood up and shouted, his voice cracking with betrayal. "We made you, George. How could you?" The shout echoed, lonely and painful. Then another voice joined in from the upper decks. "Fake! Sell out!" Caleb turned to the heckler, his face flushed. "Shut your mouth!" Caleb yelled, though his own voice trembled with doubt. "That ain't the whole story. I met him. He ain't like that." But the rancher just spat on the concrete floor. "Open your ears, son. He said it himself. He thinks we are just wallets with legs." George heard the heckles. Each one felt like a physical blow. He didn't flinch. He didn't retreat to the shadows of the wings where safety waited. He stayed in the light. He knew that leaving the stage now would be an admission of guilt. He had to endure this. He had to stand in the fire. He closed his eyes for a brief second, thinking of the boardroom meeting 3 years ago. He remembered the smell of the expensive coffee, the cold glass of the table, and the soulless eyes of the executives who had proposed tripling the merchandise prices. He remembered losing his temper. He remembered shouting, but the edit was a masterpiece of malice. High above the arena, inside the glass-walled sound booth, Julian Thorne was practically vibrating with adrenaline. He watched the scene unfold on the monitors with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a colony of ants under a magnifying glass. "It is working," he whispered, a twisted smile distorting his face. "Look at them. They are turning on him." Beside him, Eddie, the corrupted sound engineer, was slumped in his chair, his face pale and slick with sweat. He was staring at the mixing board as if it were a murder weapon. I think I am going to be sick, Mr. Thorne," Eddie stammered. "This isn't right. They are going to tear him apart down there." Thorne spun around, his eyes blazing. "You will do nothing, Eddie. You will sit there, and you will keep the mic dead. If you touch a single fader, I will ruin you. I will make sure you never work a day in this industry again. I will bury you in so much litigation, your grandchildren will be paying off your legal fees. Do you understand?" Eddie nodded, terrified, shrinking back into his chair. Suddenly, the heavy soundproof door of the booth flew open, slamming against the wall with a thunderous crash. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like a bear that had just been poked. It was Rusty, the tour's head audio engineer, a Vietnam veteran with a gray ponytail and a reputation for being the best set of ears in Nashville. He had been sent on a wild goose chase to the loading docks by Thorne's assistant just 10 minutes before the sabotage, told that a generator was failing. But Rusty knew his rig. He knew the generators were fine. He had run all the way back, his chest heaving, driven by a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong. Rusty took in the scene in a split second. The red emergency lights on the board, the terrified look on Eddie's face, the smug, predatory stance of Julian Thorne, and the silence from the stadium below. "What the hell is going on here?" Rusty roared, stepping into the small room. "Why is the house dark? Why is the mic cut?" Thorne stepped between Rusty and the console, smoothing his suit jacket. "There was a technical malfunction, Rusty. A catastrophic failure. We are handling it. You can wait outside." Rusty didn't buy it. He pushed past Thorne, his eyes locking onto the laptop connected to the system override. He saw the waveform on the screen. He saw the file name, GS Meeting Edit Final.wave. "You son of a bitch," Rusty growled, the realization hitting him like a sledgehammer. "You played a tape? You cut the live feed to play a doctored tape?" Thorne's composure cracked. "Security!" he yelled, reaching for the radio on his belt. "Remove this man!" But Rusty was already moving. He lunged for the console. Thorne grabbed his arm, and the two men grappled in the cramped space. Thorne was younger, but Rusty had spent 40 years hauling speaker cabinets and fighting in bar brawls. He shoved Thorne backward, sending the executive crashing into a rack of amplifiers. "Eddie, help me!" Thorne screamed from the floor. "Stop him!" Eddie looked at Rusty, then at Thorne, then down at the stadium where his hero was standing alone in the dark. A spark of courage fueled by shame ignited in his chest. "No," Eddie whispered. Rusty reached the mixing board. His hands flew over the controls with the speed of a concert pianist. He didn't try to shut it down. He knew that silence wouldn't fix this. The lie was already out there. The only cure was the truth. He grabbed the mouse connected to the laptop. He saw the file structure. Thorne had been arrogant. He hadn't just kept the edited clip. The original source file, the full 2-hour recording of that board meeting, was sitting in a folder marked Raw Assets. Rusty double-clicked the raw file. He didn't know the time codes. He didn't know where the context was, but he knew George. He knew that if he played enough of it, the truth would come out. He slammed the master fader up to the maximum level, bypassing the limiters. "Get away from that." Thorne scrambled to his feet, lunging for Rusty's throat. Rusty threw an elbow back, catching Thorne in the ribs, winding him. Then he hit the spacebar. Down in the arena, the static hiss of the speakers coming back to life made everyone jump. The silence was broken not by music, but by the sound of a chair scraping against a floor. The ambient noise of the recording starting up again. The crowd froze. Was this more? Was he going to insult them again? Then George's voice returned, but this time the tone was different. It wasn't the calm, clipped edit they had heard before. It was a roar. The audio quality was still grainy, but the passion was unmistakable. It picked up exactly where the edit had cut off, but Rusty had rewound it a few seconds to give the running start. The voice boomed, shaking the dust from the rafters. "I don't give a damn about what these people think." The crowd flinched, expecting the insult, but the sentence didn't stop. It accelerated. "I don't give a damn about what these people on the board think about profit margins." The stadium gasped, a collective intake of breath that sounded like the wind changing direction. The recording continued, George's voice rising in volume and intensity, vibrating with righteous anger. "You sit there in your suits and tell me I just want their money. Is that what you think this is? You think because they wear boots and drive trucks that they are stupid, that they are just revenue streams to you?" On stage, George lifted his head. He heard it. He heard the context. He realized what was happening. A small, sad smile touched his lips. The truth was fighting its way out. The recording played on, capturing the sound of a hand slamming onto a table. "I said no. I will not raise the ticket prices to $200. I will not sign off on cheap merchandise. These people work for a living. They are the reason I am here. They are the reason you have a job. If you try to squeeze one more dime out of my fans to pay for your bonuses, I walk. Do you hear me? I will burn this contract and I will go back to roping steers in Petite before I let you rob the people who made me." The audio clip ended with the sound of a heavy door slamming shut, George storming out of that meeting years ago. For 3 seconds, the stadium was silent again. But this silence was different. It wasn't the silence of betrayal. It was the silence of awe. It was the silence of 60,000 people realizing they had almost been fooled into hating the man who had just defended them with the ferocity of a lion protecting its cubs. Then it started. It began in the nosebleed section. A low rumble, a stomping of feet. It spread down through the tiers, gathering speed and volume like an avalanche. It wasn't just applause, it was a primal roar of vindication. People were crying, people were hugging strangers. The shame of their doubt turned into a fury of support. Caleb Moore in the front row felt tears streaming down his dusty face. He grabbed his hat and threw it into the air. "That is him!" Caleb screamed, his voice raw. "That is the man who saved us!" On stage, the emergency lights finally cut out as Rusty bypassed the lighting console override. The main stage rig fired up. But instead of the flashy strobes, the lighting director, sensing the moment, bathed the stage in a pure, bright white light. George Strait stood there, illuminated. He looked small against the vastness of the stage, but his shadow stretched out long and tall behind him. He walked to the microphone. He tapped it. It was live. He didn't scream. He didn't gloat. He leaned into the mic, his voice calm, steady, and filled with a profound grace. "I reckon the truth has a way of finding its own microphone," he said. The crowd erupted again, a wall of sound so intense it felt like the roof might lift off. Chants of George, George, George began to cycle through the arena. Up in the booth, the fight was over. Thorne was backed into a corner, breathing hard, his tie askew. Rusty stood over the console, guarding it like a watchdog. The door opened again, and this time it wasn't a technician. It was the venue's head of security, accompanied by 2 off-duty Houston police officers who had been working the event. They had heard everything. They looked at Thorne with expressions of pure disgust. "Mr. Thorne," the security chief said, his voice icy. "The venue owners would like a word, and after that I believe these officers have some questions about criminal tampering and breach of contract." Thorne straightened his jacket, trying to regain a shred of dignity, but his hands were shaking. "You don't understand," he spat. "It was a business strategy. It was for the shareholders." "Get him out of here," Rusty said, not even looking at him, "before I throw him off the balcony myself." As Thorne was led away in handcuffs, he looked down at the stadium one last time. He saw a sea of cowboy hats, a unified ocean of people who had rejected his cynicism. He had tried to break their spirit, but he had only forged it stronger. Back on stage, George waited for the chant to die down. He signaled to the band. The drummer, wiping tears from his eyes, counted off 4 clicks. The band launched into The Fireman, but they played it with a ferocity they had never mustered before. The tempo was faster, the guitars were louder, the energy was frantic and joyous. George didn't just sing, he attacked the song. He moved across the stage, shaking hands, signing hats, looking people in the eye. When he reached the section where Caleb and Sarah were standing, he stopped. He knelt down at the edge of the stage, ignoring the security protocols. He reached out and grabbed Caleb's hand. "Thank you for believing, son," George said, his voice audible only to Caleb over the roar of the music. Caleb gripped the legend's hand. "We never doubted you, George." "Not really." George stood up, winked at little Lily, and tossed his guitar pick to her. He walked back to the center of the stage, the music swelling to a crescendo. The concert had ceased to be a performance. It had become a victory lap. It was a celebration of values that the modern world was trying to kill: honor, loyalty, and the simple truth. But as the song ended and the cheers washed over him, George knew the night wasn't over. The damage Thorne had tried to inflict was deep. The world outside the stadium had only heard the first clip on social media. The lie was halfway around the world, while the truth was still putting on its boots. He needed to do one more thing. He needed to address the heart of the matter, not with a song, but with a promise. He signaled for the band to stop. Total silence fell over the arena once more. George took the acoustic guitar from its stand. He didn't plug it in. He just held it. "Folks," he said, his voice echoing in the vast space. There are people in high offices who think music is a product. They think you are numbers on a spreadsheet. Tonight, we saw the ugly face of that greed. But tonight, we also saw something else. He paused, looking up at the sound booth where Rusty gave him a thumbs up. We saw that you can't edit a man's soul. You can't hack a reputation that was built on 40 years of looking people in the eye and telling them the truth. He strummed a single chord. It was the opening to Troubadour. I am going to finish this show, George said. And then I am going to go out to that parking lot and I am going to shake every hand I can until the sun comes up, because I work for you. And don't you ever let anyone tell you different. The crowd didn't cheer this time, they wept. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated connection. The barrier between star and fan had dissolved completely. But as George began to sing the opening lines, a new figure appeared in the wings of the stage. It was Martha, his tour manager, holding a phone. She looked pale. She caught George's eye and made a cut motion across her throat. George frowned. He kept playing. Martha ran onto the stage, something she had never done in her career. She whispered urgently into George's ear. "Boss, it's the news. The clip, the first clip. It's trending worldwide. The stock price of the label just tanked, but the narrative out there is still that you hate the fans. The live stream of the concert was cut by Thorne before the truth came out. The world doesn't know. Only these people here know." George stopped playing. The stadium went quiet, sensing the tension. "They cut the feed?" George asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Yes," Martha said. "CNN, Fox, everyone is running with the greedy George story. We need to do a press conference now." George looked at the crowd. He looked at the camera cranes that were slumped over, powered down by Thorne's order. He realized that the 60,000 people here were witnesses, but the rest of the world was being fed a lie. He looked at Martha. "Turn the cameras back on. They are locked out, George." "We can't broadcast." George smiled. It was the smile of a cowboy who had just drawn a royal flush. "Then give me your phone, Martha." He took the smartphone. He walked to the center of the stage. He held the phone up, facing himself and the massive crowd behind him. "Light it up," George shouted to the audience. 60,000 cell phone flashlights turned on instantly, creating a galaxy of light that was brighter than any stage rig. George hit Go Live on his personal Instagram account, which he hadn't used in years. "World," he said to the tiny camera lens, his face filling the screen, backed by the ocean of lights. "I hear there is a story going around. Well, I am here in Houston, and I have got 60,000 friends who want to set the record straight." He turned the phone around to face the crowd. The roar that came out of them was not just loud, it was a declaration of war against the lie. The smartphone in George Strait's hand felt alien, a piece of plastic and glass that held the attention of millions, contrasting sharply with the wood and steel of the guitar slung across his back. On the small screen, the viewer count was skyrocketing, 10,000, 50,000, 100,000. The comments were scrolling so fast, they were a blur of white text, a digital waterfall of confusion and judgment. The world was tuning in to see the crash. They were tuning in to see the greedy villain the news had painted him to be. George didn't look at the comments. He looked into the lens, his blue eyes piercing through the digital noise. He adjusted his hat, a slow, deliberate movement that broadcasted a calm he didn't entirely feel. "I am told," George began, his voice steady and amplified by the stadium system so that both the live crowd and the internet could hear, "that there is a recording floating around. A recording where I say I only care about the money." He paused. The stadium was dead silent, 60,000 people holding their breath to support him. "Well, that recording is real, but it is like a fence with half the posts missing. It don't hold nothing in, and it don't keep nothing out. I want you to hear the rest of the fence." George signaled to the sound booth. Rusty, the veteran engineer who had saved the night, was ready. He gave a thumbs up from high above. "Play it, Rusty. Let the whole world hear it." For the second time that night, the audio of the boardroom meeting blasted through the massive array of speakers. But this time, the context was captured by the phone's microphone. The global audience heard the distortion, the ambient noise of the stadium, and the undeniable power of George's voice in the recording. "I don't give a damn about what these people on the board think about profit margins," the recording thundered. "You sit there in your suits and tell me I just want their money. Is that what you think this is? You think because they wear boots and drive trucks that they are stupid, that they are just revenue streams to you? On the phone screen, the comments slowed down. The hateful emojis vanished. Words like "wait," "OMG," and "he's defending us" began to appear. I said, "No, I will not raise the ticket prices. I will burn this contract, and I will go back to roping steers in Petite before I let you rob the people who made me." As the recording ended with the sound of the slamming door, the stadium erupted. It wasn't just a cheer, it was a vindication. The sound was so loud it distorted the microphone on the phone. George smiled, a genuine, crinkle-eyed smile that warmed the cold technology in his hand. He brought the phone back to his face. "My name is George Strait," he said simply, "and I approve this message. Not the suits, not the shareholders, me." He handed the phone back to Martha, who was weeping openly on the side of the stage. She took it, her hands shaking, and kept the stream running as she pointed it at the crowd, showing the world the sea of cowboy hats and tear-stained faces united in loyalty. George turned back to the mic. He looked exhausted. The adrenaline of the confrontation was fading, replaced by the bone-deep weariness of a man who had fought a battle for his soul. But he wasn't done. He had a job to do. "We have got one more song," George announced, "and I think it is fitting, because no matter what the suits say, no matter what the technology tries to do, eventually the cowboy has to ride away. But he rides away on his own terms." The band struck up the opening chords of "The Cowboy Rides Away." It was a song he had sung thousands of times, but tonight every lyric carried the weight of a final testament. When he sang the line, "I'm gonna smile when I leave," he looked up at the empty VIP box where Julian Thorne had stood earlier. It was a moment of quiet triumph. The corporate predator was gone, erased from the narrative while the music remained. As the final notes rang out, fading into the Houston night, George didn't rush off stage. He stayed. He walked from one end to the other, bowing, waving, absorbing the love that was washing over him. He unstrapped his guitar and held it up, a warrior raising his sword. The house lights came on fully, revealing the sheer scale of the humanity in front of him. Then he did something he rarely did. He walked down the stairs at the center of the stage, bypassing the security detail. The guards tensed, but George waved them off. He walked straight to the barricade where Caleb, Sarah, and Lily were standing. The young family was stunned. Caleb, still clutching his hat, looked at George as if he was seeing an apparition. "You made it to Houston," George said, shouting over the lingering cheers. "We made it," Caleb replied, his voice hoarse. "Thanks to you. And we heard the truth, George. We never believed the lie. Not for a second." George reached into his pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper, the set list for the night, handwritten. He took a Sharpie from his pocket, signed it, and handed it to Lily. Then he leaned in closer to Caleb. "You said you had an interview at the refinery?" Caleb nodded. "Yes, sir. Tomorrow morning at 8, if the truck starts." George shook his head. "Cancel it." Caleb blinked, confused. "Sir? You are a mechanic, aren't you? You fixed that water pump with a pocket knife and a prayer. I watched you. You have got good hands, son. And you have got integrity. You defended me when the whole stadium was against me." George pulled a business card from his vest pocket. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with a simple logo, a cattle brand. "My ranch foreman in Bourne is retiring next month. I need someone who can fix tractors, trucks, and fences, and who doesn't mind getting dirty. It comes with a house on the property and a fair wage, a real wage, not what these suits think you are worth." Caleb stared at the card. His hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped it. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth. You are offering me a job?" Caleb stammered. "I am offering you a life," George said, his eyes serious. "If you want it, call that number in the morning, ask for Bubba. Tell him the king sent you." George reached out, gripped Caleb's shoulder firmly, and then turned away, disappearing into the tunnel surrounded by his security team. Caleb stood there amidst the falling confetti and the departing crowd, holding the card like it was a winning lottery ticket. He looked at Sarah, and for the first time in months, the fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a dawn of hope. Backstage, the atmosphere was chaotic but jubilant. The band members were high-fiving, the crew was hugging. But George walked straight through the celebration, heading for his dressing room. He needed a moment of silence. He opened the door and found Martha waiting for him. She was holding a tablet. "You broke the internet, George," she said, a laugh bubbling up in her throat. "The label's stock is in freefall, but your catalog streams are up 4,000%. The board of directors just issued a press release. They fired Thorne. They are claiming they had no knowledge of his rogue marketing tactics. They are begging for a meeting. George sat down on the leather sofa and began to pull off his boots. He groaned as his feet were released from the leather. "Tell them I am busy," George said, not looking up. "Tell them I am busy for the next, let's say 20 years. Martha smiled. "And Thorne?" "Police took him out the back way. He is being charged with everything from breach of contract to criminal mischief. His career is over. He will be lucky if he can get a job managing a jukebox in a dive bar." George nodded slowly. He didn't feel joy at Thorne's destruction. He just felt a sense of balance being restored. Justice in the West wasn't about revenge. It was about setting things right. "I am going to the bus, Martha. But first, I have a promise to keep." George put his boots back on. He walked out of the dressing room, down the loading dock ramp, and out into the humid Houston night. The parking lot was a scene of organized chaos. Tour buses, semi-trucks, and hundreds of fans who had gathered near the fence, hoping for a glimpse. When George emerged, a hush fell over them. He didn't have his guitar, he didn't have a microphone, he just had himself. He walked over to the fence. The security guards tried to form a perimeter, but George waved them back. "Let them be," he ordered softly. For the next 2 hours, George Strait stood by the chain-link fence. He shook hands. He signed hats, boots, ticket stubs, and even a prosthetic leg. He listened to stories. He heard about broken hearts, mortgages paid off, sons lost in wars, and daughters getting married. He looked every single person in the eye. This wasn't a marketing stunt. There were no cameras here. This was penance and gratitude intertwined. He was washing away the stain of Thorne's lie with the sweat of his own brow. He was proving, one handshake at a time, that he was exactly who they thought he was. Around 2 a.m., the crowd had thinned out. The last fan, an elderly woman in a wheelchair, held his hand for a long time. "Thank you for the music, George," she whispered. "It got me through the nights when I was alone." George squeezed her hand, his own hand aching and swollen. "No, ma'am. Thank you for listening. Without you, I am just a guy talking to himself in a room." He watched her roll away toward her van. The parking lot was quiet now, save for the hum of the diesel engines of the tour buses. The air smelled of exhaust and ozone. George walked to his bus. The mystery. The driver, a man named Slim, who had been with him for 30 years, was waiting by the door. "Ready to roll, boss?" Slim asked. George stopped and looked up at the sky. The city lights of Houston washed out the stars, but he knew they were there. He thought about the road ahead. He thought about Caleb and his family moving into the ranch house in Bourne. He thought about the music. Thorne had said that he needed to change to survive, that he needed to become something else. But standing there in the dust, George realized that the only way to survive was to stay exactly the same, to be like a rock in a river, let the water rush by, let the trends change, but stay rooted in the ground. "Yeah, Slim," George said, climbing the steps of the bus. "Let's go home." The bus hissed as the air brakes released. It pulled out of the stadium lot, merging onto the highway. Inside, George poured himself a glass of water and sat by the window. He watched the concrete jungle of Houston give way to the open plains. He pulled his phone out one last time. He didn't check the news. He didn't check the stocks. He opened his gallery and looked at a photo he had taken earlier that day. A picture of a battered old Ford truck on the side of the road, with a young family standing next to it, smiling because a stranger had stopped to help. He deleted the photo. He didn't need the proof. He lived it. The bus rolled on, eating up the miles under the Texas moon. The king of country closed his eyes, lulled by the rhythm of the road, the only place he had ever truly belonged. The signal was clear, the static was gone, and the music, the real music, would play on forever.